From Chicago, where we do try to stand up and be strong, here in the great state of Illinois, we welcome you, all you sisters, you brothers, you friends, you neighbors, you family, citizens of the world, to still another edition of the Live from the Heartland show. And this would be number 78. We call it Heartland at Home during the pandemic. And it's for the week of the 20th of November. So stay tuned. We have a couple of wonderful guests. We've got Donald Cohen, the founder and director of In the Public Interest, talking about privatization, and the incomparable Deborah Shore, our hometown shiro, who was just appointed regional administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. And good morning to you, Katy Hogan.
Good morning, Michael James. Good to see you.
Good to see you. I understand we have a little sad news to share at the top of the show here.
Well, yeah, and we just decided to start with it because it's in place of our good news, because it was good news to know a man like Elliot Delman. Really good news. And we're sorry to share with folks that we lost that great artist this week. And Elliot Delman, to me, was one of the original Rogers Park rock and rollers. He was an incredible musician, talented composer, etc. And we worked at Round Records together as young 20-somethings when we were running the streets in Rogers Park, making rock and roll and havoc. And he became a great teacher, dedicated father. And I'm sorry I didn't see him before he left. Basically. Yeah,
me too. I mean, he put on some great shows along with others at the Heartland Cafe. Annie in the Hat, or Rocco in the Hat.
Rocco in the Hat, yes. Yeah, well, he played with them when they played at our joint, and wonderful, yeah.
He was a wonderful human being. Well, let's shift a little bit now to the global front, where the results of this, how do you say that, COP26?
Yeah, COP26, yeah.
There's considerable disappointment from the global south on the lack of concrete steps being taken, the watering down of phase down rather than phase out of coal, for example.
Yeah.
Protests continue. People are raising a lot of questions. I'm sure some good things came out of it, but we didn't get what we need to save the planet.
It was actually very moving to see the guy who was basically the host of it. I forget his name and his country. I think it might have been India, but I'm not sure. He was actually breaking down a little bit at the end when he called a close to Glasgow. And some news program juxtaposed that closing with the Paris closing, where people were cheering and hugging and all kind of things. And so, you know, it's a bleak moment. Anyway, let's see what else what other good news?
There's a lot of stuff in the world going on. You want to share a few trying situations?
Yeah, we have real sadness in the Sudan, where the coup occurred and people are trying to demonstrate against it in a democratic fashion, and they're being fired upon with live weaponry. So, I mean, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. In Afghanistan, there are some 20 million or more people facing starvation because the food is not getting in for a variety of reasons, but the food is not getting in. And we've got a lot of voices crying alarm about this situation. We can't watch it happen. But on the other hand, Pakistan and Iran turn out to be the 2 countries taking in the most Afghan refugees. Who knows what situation they're in once they get there, but the refugee problem in general, we continue to look at the border of Poland. People are acting badly, and we got to keep an eye on that.
Yeah, and we do have Afghan refugees coming to our neighborhood where we do the show out of. That's Rogers Park in the 49th Ward in Chicago. And people are stepping up with clothes and arrangements for people.
They are indeed. They are indeed.
Shout out to our state rep, Kelly Cassidy, and our alderwoman, Maria Haddon, for
and the state senator and the state senator, Mike Simmons. The 3 of them together have done an incredible thing, along with State Senator Ram Villavalam, who's being a leader in this. Okay, a couple things, Michael, before we bring on our incredible guest. this week nationally, there were two trials going on that everybody's paying attention to. Georgia, to me, the thing about the Georgia thing, the Ahmaud Arbery murder defendants, we've got that happening against the backdrop of Georgia Republicans trying to pull every trick in the book on voter suppression and putting it into law, including gerrymandering and everything. Georgia needs our help. And then the other one right up here, our neighbors in Kenosha.
In Racine, on the Kyle Rittenberg case. Here in Racine, Wisconsin, up in Racine, not too far from here, the country awaits the verdict. The state troopers are on call. The judge is a strange character. Ordered the jury to applaud. We don't know how this one's going to turn out, but this one is close to home, and we'll see. We're waiting, like a lot of other people.
Yeah. And the last thing, the good news is we did get Build Back Better passed through the House yesterday, the same week that all Republicans except for Liz Cheney and our own Adam Kinzinger from Illinois are the only Republicans who voted for the censure of that
They're the two best Republicans in the world.
Well, they're the only ones who voted against it, the censure, and the man needed censuring. I don't know what to say. Forget it. Boosters for all, whether they need it or not. Boosters for all. That's what's going on this week. Okay. I think we should let in our new guest, shouldn't we? We should
let's
do
go.
A station break.
Plenty of local news. We'll cover it in the future.
Yeah. Go ahead, do a station break and we'll bring them in.
Okay, you are listening to the Live from the Heartland show on WLUW 88.7. We're here every Saturday morning at 9 o'clock, and there's more information at the end of the show if you miss it live on Saturday morning.
Welcome to Donald Cohen.
Hey, Donald.
Michael, you want to tell our listeners how we got introduced to Donald this week?
Well, frequent listeners to this show know that Bob Lawson comes on once in a while, whether talking about labor or going way back to Rising Up Angry and Join Community Union. But he got a hold of me and said that he had somebody putting out a book that was real important and we should bring him on. And that person is you, Donald Cohen of In the Public Interest, a national resource and policy center that advocates for democratic control of public goods and services. So let's get going. Let me just say that Naomi Klein has referred to you as America's leading defender of the public interest. How about starting off with telling us a little bit about yourself and what In the Public Interest is all about and how you came to found it?
Sure. So I've been an organizer for many years in a variety of issues. I've been close to, been working in the labor movement, in community organizing and in the labor movement for many years. I live in Los Angeles, just so people know. And, it's kind of what I've been doing, organizing for justice and workers' rights and economic justice and all of the above. In the Public Interest, I created about, I think, 11 or 12 years back. We had been fighting privatization of, I was in San Diego at the time, working both at the Central Labor Council and a nonprofit that I helped create there. And we were fighting privatization of major public services at the County of San Diego and at the City of San Diego. And realized at the time that there really was no resource center. There was no place for folks to go around the country if you wanted to fight privatization. So we created In the Public Interest. And what we do is we produce lots of research and tools and strategy guides on how to both fight the privatization of public goods and services, but also how to lift up and expand public services as well. So, we work with groups and unions and others all around the country.
You also, when I researched a little more about you, I immediately came upon the book Dismantling Democracy, which you offer free online. It's a 68-page tome which to me, as a political activist for a long time, is like, thank you so much. I immediately printed out the bibliography, which starts with important conservative papers and articles, important conservative books, and then important books analyzing the rise of the right. And at the very end, a few progressive books and sources. What you have done, your life's work, I'm trying not to overblow this right now, Donald. Your life's work is so important. And the fact that you have shared it in the ways that you have I just have to say thank you so much.
Yeah.
This book, Dismantling Democracy, which I fell asleep on last night only because I was reading too late, not because of the material by any means. It's a great, useful workbook, really, for this year, 2022, coming up.
Yeah.
All right. So enough.
Let me tell you what it is and where it comes
Okay.
from and all that, because I think it is, and yeah, it is available for free online. It's as the PDF. I think you can actually buy it also on Amazon and other places, but no need to do that. I studied for many years what the right wing has done, the different parts of the right wing have done to turn people away from government and to attack government, to turn people away from public services, to advance free market fundamentalism, and, read a ton, about it and thought a lot about it and came up, and so the booklet, I call it a booklet because it's only 60 pages. Is the first part of it is, and then what I think is sort of an analysis, or what I think are the key strategies that the right has used, and the right being different pieces, corporations and ideologues and all the above, because I think it's really important for us to understand how they turn people away from the institutions that we need to solve the problems that we have and the things we want to do. It wasn't just they created think tanks, and it wasn't just they busted unions, and it wasn't just this. There was a multi-sided strategy, and I feel really that important for us as progressives to understand that as a first step towards figuring out what do we do. They played the long game. What's our long game? To build up the idea of public and to kind of make America a different place than it is right now. And then the second half of the book are really provocative ideas about strategies and provocative questions about strategies, because what I advocate for is that we need on the progressive side is we need a practice of the long game. We need to fight the fights today. We need to advocate for the good things that we want and fight the bad things that we don't want, but we also need to be thinking long because they did.
Yeah. Michael, why don't you ask him about the upcoming book? Because
I will in a minute, but I'm going to quote you, a resource center on privatization of public goods to help organizations around the country and be a counterweight to the Reason Foundation and the press. So my question was, what is the Reason Foundation? I don't know about them. And
sure. The Reason Foundation is a libertarian think tank. It's been around for many, many years, well known, funded by Kochs and the Koch brothers and kind of all the usual folks. They have been kind of the key advocates for the privatization of services in the country for many, many years. They started a magazine, I think it was even as early as 1976, on called Privatization. They put out annual reports. For a while, this is now broader than just them, but for a while, they were the principal intellectual think tank, advocates for privatization and, with a fairly broad reach. So we needed an alternative that had, that dealt with, and, they help folks on the ground. They testified before state houses and stuff and things like that, which we now do as well. There needed to be a counter to that wasn't just about the individual services, prisons or water or this. We cover it all. And so, and they do too.
You do cover it all. And part of the reason for having you on now is not the book I mentioned, but the book that's coming out this week, called The Privatization of Everything: How the Plunder of Public Goods Transformed America and How We Can Fight Back. That, to me, nothing more important, again, in this year of 2022. I mean, we've been watching this since Reagan, since 1980, when he very carefully and correctly, you should point out that they've been very skillful at dismantling our stuff. And when we look at, okay, we're a year into Biden, how much has he been able to dismantle of what went before him? But I'll hold off on that. Your book, tell us about the book that's coming out this week and what it means to you.
And I'll show you the copy. I just got my copies.
Beautiful.
It's quite lovely. So I figured I'm proud of what it looks like.
It's nice.
My publisher does say, yes, they do. People do tell a book by its cover. And
Adam McCallion is also
Alan McCallion is my co-author. So and Alan is a colleague, but also an historian. And so he added some really interesting, historical context to some of the work, some of the chapters. I'll start by saying that the idea of the book came because we wanted to sort of lift up the larger story from the individual things that we pay attention to: privatization of prisons and privatization of schools and privatization. We're all doing that work and that's happening, but there's a larger thing going on, and that's sort of an attack on public goods overall. Mm. And I'll say that we define privatization in a pretty particular way. It's the way I say it is private control and power over public goods. That's not just selling off a prison or a water system or parking meters in Chicago, you may know about.
Yeah.
But it's also when there's no austerity, when there's no public funds to provide essential public services, then we're left on our own to fend for ourselves in the market. And it also includes, when they have control over public goods, it also could be a polluter next to a school that isn't adequately regulated or monitored, and that polluter has control at some level over the kids' lives in that school. So we really want to think larger, and we want to think then, all right, so what are those essential public goods that we all really need access to? And so the sort of big picture stuff: public health, a safety net, knowledge, community, democracy, mobility, some of the larger things that we need that the services advance. Now, once that's the frame of the book, but then there's lots of individual examples and stories in all the sectors and things that we know about. So I think it really ties together the larger dynamic, ties together all the stories in this larger dynamic of, there are folks taking over our stuff, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
Donald Cohen, let me ask, how does a healthy public sector enhance democracy?
That's a great question. So one is that a healthy public sector advances freedom, right? If everyone has access to healthcare and everyone has access equally without regard to how much money you have, like no one should get better healthcare because they have more money or worse healthcare because they have less money. So the ability to get places, the ability to get educated. So, those are elements of freedom. That's number one. A healthy public sector also has, makes it possible for people to participate in governance, right? When you privatize something or when you hand something over to the private, they get power over things that we should be able to decide. So, those are some of the big picture ideas. I mean, you're in Chicago, exactly, the poster child are the Chicago what happened with Chicago parking meters, the worst of which is the consortium that runs the meters now for the remaining 60 some years gets control over your streets. You can't do bus rapid transit without paying them and buying it back. You can't do bike lanes. You can't do, it constricts what you can do with climate or affordable housing or land use or any number of things. So I really do think that the assault on privatization at its core is an assault on democracy, our ability to make decisions together.
Yeah. Why should the average person care? How do we get the average person to care about this? A lot of people are turned off now to news in general, and it's hard to get. And we need everybody on board this year. So How do we get the average person to care?
Well, so we respond a couple of ways. One is there's the interesting thing about government in our lives. I say it's both invisible and ubiquitous, right?
Yeah.
You turn on the tap and the water flows. That's a public service. Do you think about that it's a government service, that it's a public service, even if it's offered privately, even if the company is private, it's still a public service that we pay for, right? So I think there's an important level of awareness of the public goods around us. I think that's an important step. I mean, the paint on our walls, in the walls in your room, does not have lead in it now because the public took action to eliminate poison in our that didn't happen because companies decided to sell a different mix of formulation of paint. It happened because the public was involved. So I think that's really important. I think the second step is then to realize what private interests do when they get in the way of that. When they get in the way of those public goods. And there's a few kind of key things. One is they take money out of the service. So if you privatize something, to a private company, sell off the water system or whatever it is, or a prison or anything, some of the money goes now to high executive compensation, to profits, to returns to shareholders, to lobbying expenses, to campaign contributions, to conferences in Tahiti or whatever. And every dollar that is spent on those things are dollars that are not spent in the things that we need, that are not spent on the service.
Yeah.
And so, and again, I think there's a sort of a level of awareness of that. Now, we all buy stuff, and we go to the store and we buy stuff, and all fine. But it's important for us to understand that when they have the stuff that just what I said, money is extracted, but also they get some control over how it's delivered, how much is delivered, what the quality is delivered, whether we get to decide that we can do it differently. So I think there's a sort of a level of sort of a drumbeat of education that needs to happen about this. And the last thing I'll say is the thing to remember is that there has been a drumbeat for 40 years. Government doesn't serve you. It serves them. It's not good. The DMV, you have to wait online at the DMV. There's a constant drumbeat on the negative.
Right.
And if there's not sort of a movement for the common good, or a pro-public movement that we call, talking about the good, reforming what needs to reform, but then it's not going to happen. The anti-government forces will continue to win.
Yeah.
Donald, let me ask you about freedom. How do you define freedom, and how does that differ, say, from libertarian freedom, or right-wing anarchy, as I like to call it?
Well, we all go back to FDR, the four freedoms, right? There's sort of freedom to thrive, freedom to live, freedom to be able to to have a say in in your life but in the community that you're in. Kind of what I was saying earlier. So I have a more New Deal form of freedom. Freedom, like if you're indebted to a bank because you went to college that you have to pay off for the next 20 years, that is not freedom.
Right.
So I think that we could take care of that. We could make college free again. I mean, free or ridiculously reduced, right? And one example I give, if we believe that everyone should have access to higher education, right? Then why are we making individuals pay the full cost, right? You don't pay to drive on the road to go to the grocery store. We all pay, all right? We all should be paying because we believe that it's in our interest for there to be an educated population. It's not just a consumer item, right? So there's sort of like, because the point there, as it relates to freedom, is that it has to also recognize our interdependence, right? Freedom has to include obligations and responsibilities to the whole, to the community. This is a democracy as it should be. You should be wearing a mask. You should get vaccinated because you can hurt somebody else, right? So that the libertarian freedom is don't, get out of my way. Of course, unless it's about, abortion. So freedom has, comes with responsibilities, and I really, to each other. I really believe that.
Wow. Go ahead, Michael.
Well, I don't know how much time we got left, but I was reading in the paper
1
how
minute.
the government of Puerto Rico is going after the head of the company that is privatizing the building of the new grid in Puerto Rico. And I wondered if you want to address that, just the privatization one more time and using that as an example.
Well, I haven't, occasionally I, read about PREPA privatization of nuts. I don't know the specifics. I don't know what's happening there now, but in general, I think that, there is, because here's what's important going forward, an infrastructure bill happened, was passed, Biden signed it. There are baked in it incentives to privatize, not universally, but they're in there. So we need to be, and what will happen when those deals are done with private capital is pretty much just what happened in Chicago. We need to make sure that there's publicly funded infrastructure, publicly controlled infrastructure, and we can, and that's how, and people can be involved in that.
Donald Cohen, it's great to meet you. And tell us one more time the name of your new book and why we should all read it.
It's called The Privatization of Everything, How the Plunder of Public Goods Transformed America and How We Can Fight Back. You should all read it because it's just really well written. It's very good, and it's important. And it's important to understand these things if we want a different country. I really believe that.
Thank you so much, Donald, for your life's work and for this book coming out right now.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah, we look forward to meeting you in person.
Yeah. We thought it would be appropriate to bring in one of our real sheroes and someone who has been keeping an eye on our water for a long time at this particular moment in her career, because it's a very exciting moment in her career. Welcome, Deborah Shore.
Hi, Deborah.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be back with you.
So first of all, let me ask, were you in Glasgow?
No.
Okay.
Okay, let's get going on. Let's keep going.
Right. So tell us.
So you just got appointed you got appointed as the administrator of the Midwest EPA, and that's an exciting new position. Tell us a little bit about it, and how it came to be, and what your job will entail.
Thank you, Michael. I am now at the end of week 4, my first month in this role as regional administrator and Great Lakes National Program Manager for Region 5 of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, which is divided into 10 regions. Each has an appointed regional administrator, which is a presidential appointment. It's a political appointment, but doesn't require Senate confirmation. And Region 5 is composed of 6 of the 8 Great Lakes states and 35 tribal nations. But it also hosts, as I mentioned, the Great Lakes National Program Office, which dispenses the hundreds of millions of dollars in Great Lakes Restoration Initiative funding for projects to restore health to the Great Lakes ecosystems. So upstate New York and parts of Pennsylvania around Lake Erie have an interest in how this region is managed as well.
Does is New York part of your district, or is it the one state that's touching the Great Lake that is not part of that district?
Well, neither New York or Pennsylvania are part of Region 5, but as they're in Region 2, I believe. But as I noted, because of the Great Lakes National Program Office, they have an interest in how this region is functions and the dispersal of the Restoration Initiative funding, because some of it has gone to Buffalo and to Erie and so forth.
So, yes, we are with Deborah Shore, who has just been appointed to the Environmental Protection Agency as our district head. And we're asking her about previous contacts with the what used to be called the Great Lakes Compact, that included the provinces of Canada that also touched the Great Lakes. And I'm wondering if previous experience when you were with the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District brought you in contact with those folks that might help in this new position?
Katie, I was fortunate enough to also have been appointed to serve on the board of a group called the Great Lakes Protection Fund by Governor Quinn in 2009, and I served for more than a decade. And this is a group that was created by 7 of the 8 Great Lakes states with support from those states to make grants in support of work, research, and projects that would improve the ecosystem health of the Great Lakes. And they did support early work done by other groups to develop what became the Great Lakes Compact, which, for your viewer and listeners' notes, is the mechanism that will govern any future withdrawals of water out of the Great Lakes outside of the Great Lakes Basin. And the compact was later adopted and passed by the legislatures of all the Great Lakes states, by the US Congress, and by the 2 Canadian provinces that border the lakes. And so it is a mechanism that will govern requests for withdrawals by communities or by industry from the Great Lakes. So I haven't worked closely with the Canadians or wasn't involved in the development of the compact, but I certainly support it and think it's a vital mechanism and an example of collective governance.
Deborah, let me ask you a little bit, stepping backward to your position as the leader and a commissioner of the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago. Will you miss your role there? And who is going to, you think, will end up getting your commissioner's spot?
Well, sure, I'll miss my role. I was part of a 9-member board doing vital work in Cook County. But I got a lot of good things done while I was there. I do feel like I accomplished some big things. And I believe climate change is going to be not only the issue of our time, but the issue of all time. And my new role places me on the front lines of trying to help communities and people throughout our region become more resilient in the face of climate change. And how do we both adapt and try to address this unique challenge? That said, I don't know who replaces me on the board of the Water Reclamation District. Will be an appointment by Governor Pritzker until the next regular election. And then there'll be a 2-year term on the ballot, as well as the normal 3 6-year terms. I certainly hope it will be someone who places conservation at the forefront of their work.
Deborah, you, for all of the time that you've been at the Water Reclamation District, you represented a turn in a new direction, that of a professional environmentalist, a conservationist, as you just said. And when I read the list of your accomplishments, I'm so grateful for your service. And I think people need to understand what should be saved that you started. Could you maybe zero in on, for example, promoting the MWRD's paradigm shift from water treatment and to resource recovery, which we talked a lot with you about over the years, and any other specific thing that's dear to your heart that you helped, shape in your time there, because it deserves applause.
Well, thank you, Katie. And Michael, let me stress at the outset that nothing gets done by one person alone.
Of course.
It took votes from my colleagues and excellent work from my staff. But I was there during a time when I think we began to see a shift, that all those things that we used to consider waste have value. And the question is, how can we find that value and put it to work for taxpayers? How can we monetize the value that resides in used water, in the methane that's generated by sewage treatment plants, in the nutrients that are in the water and solid waste coming into a treatment plant? And so over a decade or more, we've seen the Water Reclamation District endeavoring to capture the value in those various waste products. And some of it is generating revenue in terms of phosphorus crystals that are now being produced by the district. And some of it is repurposing the methane to heat the facilities and things like that. There's more to be done, but it's been exciting to be there at a time when we recognize that these are resources and not just waste. And how do we recover them? And there's still a bright future there and more to be done, but I was glad to support it. Among the other things that I'm proud of is having worked to establish an independent inspector general at the Water Reclamation District.
Yeah.
It has $1 billion budget, hundreds of millions spent in construction contracts and other contracts each year. And this is just a best government practice to have independent oversight and another set of eyes on your operations. It wasn't because the district was poorly managed, but just that this is how good governments work. And it took a while, but I'm very proud to say that we did establish an independent inspector general. We're working jointly with Cook County in deploying those resources, but it's will endure and I think be a benefit to the district.
Yeah, I appreciate that tremendously. One other thing, I was noticing this week that Trump era EPA decisions are getting a second look, shall we say, including one that got reversed this week in Mississippi around water. And I can't now put my brain around exactly what it was, but when we heard things like the Wolf being in charge of the hen house kinds of appointments at the EPA between 2016 and 2020, I'm assuming you're gonna have to go over some of that material. Are you aware of anything really dangerous that needs undoing or reversing right now? Given that they just, I don't know, auctioned off a bunch of oil in the Gulf of Mexico. Sorry.
Well, headquarters of EPA is working hard to review all the changes that have been made and do what they can, either through executive orders or rulemaking or some other procedures to make sure that we put public health and health of the environment at the fore. People are now openly talking about climate change.
Yeah.
And I'm told that they were not allowed to and restricted from doing so during the prior administration. So many of those, what I would call the restoration project, is underway in the offices in headquarters. My role as a regional administrator is to implement President Biden and Administrator Michael Regan's priorities here in Region 5, in the states and tribal nations. The infrastructure bill that was just signed into law earlier this week is a game changer. It's going to provide billions of dollars for lead pipe replacement, for electric school buses, for accelerating work on Superfund cleanup sites, for a host of other things that will actually make a difference in communities and people's lives around the region. And we just have to make sure that gets done.
Deborah, in your new job at the EPA, what are your priorities? What will you tackle first? And are there entities that you see as opposition to try to inhibit going forward in a good direction?
You mean other than the Congress, the Republican side of Congress?
Yeah, or governors in certain states, or, although most of the Great Lakes states, except for Indiana now, have Democratic governors, I believe.
It's what we find is that when you talk to people, no matter what their political preference, no matter what their religion or what sports team they pledge allegiance to, they all care about and deserve clean water to drink and clean air to breathe and places to live that aren't contaminated by chemicals.
Yeah.
And there's agreement there. And so we need to find those ways to build bridges and make sure that people, no matter what community they're in, have that clean water to drink and clean air to breathe and so forth. And I look forward to binding ourselves together in what Pope Francis has called our common home.
Nice. Well, I think that's a nice note to end on. I really appreciate you visiting with us today, Deborah, given your busy new job. And we wish you the best. Please keep doing what you've been doing because you're a great servant for the people.
Well, love you both. Thanks for the invitation. I'm always glad to be with you.
All right.
Thank you. See you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, we want to thank you all for tuning in to another edition of Live from the Heartland, AKA Heartland at Home. And as some of you know, we do record this on Fridays for broadcast on Saturday, and then youtube.com/Heartland Media forever. We just saw the news that at the Rittenhouse trial in Kenosha, he was acquitted of all 5 counts, all the homicide counts, etc. So there's not much to say except it's very disappointing. Clearly, white supremacy is an issue still to be dealt with, and we'll be talking more about this next week. So take us out, Katy, with a little information on us.
Okay. Show. For over 25 years, we've brought you live from the Heartland, now Heartland at Home. And we broadcast every Saturday morning, 9 a.m. Central on Chicago's WLUW 88.7 FM.
We stream it on WLUW.org.
And we're also on youtube.com/Heartland Media. And we have Spotify and Google Podcasts. Just type in Live from the Heartland. Thanks to our Live from the Heartland team, Luis, who we miss, Lynn Orman-Weiss, who's got a great guest coming next week, and the folks at WLUW, including podcast director Gwen Brown. We ask you to do good in the world.
Hey, the world needs all the good that we do.
All power to the people.
All power to the people.